The global cross-border payment landscape is transforming. The pace of change is expected to accelerate over the next 5 years, driven by ever-increasing pressure from emerging technologies, shifting regulatory and sanctions frameworks, and evolving international commerce. We're here to explain what it all means, especially for banks, are Reinhard Hoell, who's the associate partner at McKinsey, and Raymaekers, who's head of banking market and GPI evolution at Swift. Gentlemen, welcome to Sibos Television. Reinhard, if I can start with you, you're actually hosting a Sibos main conference session on this very subject. What are the main messages and ideas that you want to get across?
So we recently done a joint white paper together with Swift on this very topic, and it's identified a number of 8 key beliefs about the whole thing. So stuff to get the conversation going. And just to highlight 3 out of them, it's really, number one, the importance of the customer is rising ever more than we have seen in the past, where cross-border payments in many respects has been more of a technical aspect and not so much driven by even personal consumer preference. Number 2 is really a shift in growth. So traditional cross-border payment is still growing and still growing very much, but we see quite a few new areas where things like e-commerce, retail are really exploding in many areas, where it's now more and more common that you order stuff online and that you actually have cross-border payments better. And number 3 is really about the question that we have around the value chain. And here we see an increasing fragmentation, that there are more and more cross-border payment rails, and that may actually lead to some interesting implications that you may shift these rails without even realizing. So you're in a situation when you order something online, for instance, that at some point you use a very traditional cross-border payment rail, and number one, you may actually use a credit card scheme without actually knowing the whole thing.
Okay, so Wim, these are the key things. So what is the effect on traditional cross-border incumbents, bearing all this in mind?
Well, I'll also pick out 3 in terms of the effect on the incumbents. And to follow on what Reinhard was saying is really 3 key trends that banks should really understand is, 1, understand the new revenue generation streams. We don't want to be caught like in the telco where the roaming and the SMS revenue have gone away and it's all shifted to WhatsApp. So that's really important to understand. Secondly, building on that, banks have to really shift their thinking and the construction of how they engage on the customer experience. And probably to be there where the customer is, even more so than before. And in order to do so, develop more collaborative solutions. And Swift GPI is one of those good examples of that.
And Reinhard, you've done some specific research into this area. So what were your findings? What emerged?
Well, it emerged, first of all, a very wide variety of opinions. So number one, there are quite a few players who said, well, if we use Swift GPI, it's all going to be fine. Of course, up to the point that some people actually said, well, it's all going to be very, very different, and we're really in a fragmented world going forward. So again, really 3 things. Number 1 is we are not going to see a homogeneous world going forward. We don't have the advantage likely of a global regulation. There's going to be likely more regional solutions. SEPA in Europe is going to be one of them, which has been existing a long while. That may be copied into other regions as well, sometimes regulatory driven, sometimes also more from a business perspective. Number 2, it's really about an increasing pressure about revenue pools and actually cost setup. So Wim already mentioned that. The revenue pools are going to shift, but also we do expect very much so to a continued fall in the actually core revenues, which we have seen in some of the core corridors. So it is even possible that we go down to $1 or $2 in some of the main areas. And number 3 is actually a very much in volatile value chain, at least for some time. So we do firmly believe that a lot of the incumbent players are going to be there in the future. But it also means a lot of these players will have to keep on moving, need to identify new revenue sources, and exactly as Wim said, just be careful that in this time of shift, they're not standing still.
And given that, what's your view, Wim, about the reactions of banks to this?
Well, the reaction to the paper has been very positive so far.
So far.
And of course, we invite everybody to read the paper, actually. But more than trying to establish the facts of this new reality, the purpose of the paper is more to identify the trends that shape this future going forward. And what better place at Sibos to have this critical dialogue around those forces that will shape the industry that Reinhard has mentioned before.
And let's take this concept of the future, Reinhard, because does this mean that any payment methods will disappear, but we'll all be paying with things like Alipay or PayPal in, let's say, 5 years' time? Who knows, perhaps slightly earlier than that?
So I've got to be careful here. So it's of course possible around the whole thing, but at the moment it seems actually more likely that we're going to be paying with more payment methods. The question is whether you actually notice that. So of course there is always going to be certain large value payments in particular which are going to be run on the traditional payment rails, and there's always going to be a place for SWIFT in that respect, for instance. However, and coming back to this e-commerce example, if the e-commerce retailer platform is controlling what payment method you're using, it's actually quite possible, depending on what you have ordered, between what corridor and in what area, it may actually shift back and forth, and you may actually have used 10 different payment methods without even realizing that.
And the big question, Wim, what does this mean for SWIFT?
Well, I think what it means for SWIFT is that for a 40-year-old fintech, we continue what we've been doing for the last 40 years, is to continue to reinvent ourselves. Deploy technology for the benefit of the community, whether it's on APIs, whether it's on payments innovation, on financial sanctions and screening utilities. I think that's really the role of SWIFT, is to facilitate and to provide these new solutions for the benefit of the financial community.
Good news. We'll have to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on Sibos TV. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.